History, my friends, is not for the faint of heart. Today, we unravel a particularly dark thread. The gruesome torture methods of ancient Rome. From public squares to the Colosseum's blood-soaked sands, cruelty was a spectacle and a tool of control. We'll delve into the most notorious practices, revealing the chilling reality of Roman punishment. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. Let's begin with perhaps the most infamous and haunting form of Roman execution, crucifixion. This method, etched into the collective memory of humanity, stands as a symbol of both unimaginable suffering and the absolute power wielded by the Roman state. It was not simply a way to end a life, but a calculated display of dominance intended to send a chilling message to all who witnessed it. Crucifixion was more than a method of death. It was a public spectacle designed to inflict maximum suffering and serve as a brutal deterrent. Crowds would gather in public squares or amphitheaters, drawn by a morbid curiosity and a sense of communal participation in the enforcement of Roman law. The execution was staged for maximum visibility, ensuring that the lesson was not lost on anyone present. The condemned, stripped of their dignity and clothing, were either nailed or bound to a rough wooden cross. The process itself was excruciating, iron spikes driven through wrists and ankles or ropes biting into flesh, securing the victim in a position of utter vulnerability. As the hours dragged on, the weight of their own body tore at their wounds, causing unimaginable agony with every breath and movement. Death did not come quickly. Instead, it arrived slowly, often by asphyxiation, as the body's awkward position made it increasingly difficult to breathe. The victim would push up with their legs to gasp for air, only to collapse again in exhaustion, each movement sending fresh waves of pain through their battered body. This cycle could continue for hours or even days before the end finally came. Days could pass before death, with victims left exposed to the scorching sun, chilling winds, and the gaze of the public. Birds and insects would gather, adding to the torment. The suffering was not only physical, but also deeply psychological. Humiliation and despair compounded the agony as the condemned were denied even the dignity of a private death. The process was meticulously organized by Roman authorities. Soldiers would prepare the crosses and oversee every detail, ensuring that the punishment was carried out with ruthless efficiency. Sometimes the legs of the condemned were broken to hasten death, but often the suffering was allowed to continue as long as possible. Crucifixion was reserved for those considered the lowest or most dangerous in Roman society: slaves, rebels, and anyone who dared to challenge the might of Rome. It was a punishment meant to strip away not just life, but identity and hope, leaving only a warning for others. The public nature of the execution was crucial, a stark reminder that Roman law was absolute and that mercy was a rare commodity. Officials would often preside over these events, reinforcing the authority of the state and the consequences of defiance. The suffering became a tool, a spectacle to instill fear and obedience. The crowd's reactions, ranging from horror to grim fascination, were part of the intended effect, ensuring that the memory of the punishment lingered long after the victim had died. Even children and families would witness these events, their young minds shaped by the harsh realities of Roman justice. The spectacle was meant to leave a lasting impression on every member of society, reinforcing the boundaries of acceptable behavior. Beyond the physical pain, crucifixion was a form of psychological torment. Naked, exposed, and utterly helpless, the condemned faced not only death, but the complete erasure of their humanity in the eyes of the crowd. The image of the crucified Christ, so familiar today, is a stark reminder of the brutality of this ancient practice. It serves as a symbol not only of suffering, but of the capacity for cruelty that has marked human history. To reflect on crucifixion is to confront the darkest aspects of our past, a time when pain and fear were wielded as instruments of control, and the spectacle of suffering was woven into the very fabric of society. From one agonizing death to another, we turn to the wheel, an instrument of torture so brutal, so merciless, that it has haunted the nightmares of generations. In the shadowy corners of ancient Rome, the breaking wheel was not just a tool of execution, but a symbol of absolute power and terror. Its very presence was enough to send shivers down the spine of even the bravest souls. The condemned, often accused of crimes ranging from sedition to robbery, would be dragged before a jeering crowd. Their fate was sealed the moment they were bound to the massive wooden wheel, their limbs stretched to the breaking point, exposed and vulnerable. The wheel itself was a monstrous device, its rough wood stained by the suffering of countless victims before them. The executioner, chosen for his strength and lack of mercy, would raise a heavy iron bar or hammer high above his head. With a sickening crack, he would bring it down upon the victim's limbs, shattering bones with each blow. The sound echoed through the square, mingling with the gasps and cries of onlookers. Each strike was calculated, designed to prolong suffering rather than bring a swift end. The pain was unimaginable, bones splintered, nerves aflame, the body contorted in agony. The victim's screams pierced the air, echoing off ancient stone walls, a chilling reminder of the price of defiance. For many, the agony was so intense that they begged for death, but mercy was rarely granted. Sometimes the ordeal did not end with the breaking of bones. The victim was left bound to the wheel, exposed to the elements, sun, wind and rain, slowly dying from blood loss, shock or dehydration. Hours would pass, then days, as life ebbed away in excruciating slowness. As the victim lingered between life and death, crows and other scavengers would gather, drawn by the scent of blood and suffering. Sometimes these birds would peck at the still living flesh, adding a new layer of torment to an already unbearable fate. The wheel became a feast for the creatures of the wild, a gruesome spectacle for all to witness. This agony could last for days, with the victim drifting in and out of consciousness, tormented by pain, thirst, and the knowledge that death would not come quickly. The suffering was both physical and psychological, a slow unraveling of body and spirit. The wheel was not just a method of execution, it was a public warning, a gruesome message to all who might consider defying Roman law. Its display in the town square was a spectacle meant to instill terror, a reminder that the consequences of rebellion or crime were not just death, but a suffering that lingered long after the victim's last breath. The Romans understood the power of fear as a tool of control. By making examples of those who broke the law, they maintained order through intimidation and brutality. The wheel was a symbol of their authority, a tool to crush dissent and keep the population in line. Broken bodies became signposts, grim reminders of the price of disobedience. Even centuries later, the legend of the wheel endures, a testament to the extremes of human cruelty and the terrifying lengths to which power will go to maintain control. Scaphism stands out as perhaps the most horrific method of torture attributed to the Romans. The condemned was bound inside a hollowed log or between two boats, trapped in suffocating darkness. Forced to ingest milk and honey, they suffered excruciating diarrhea while the same mixture was smeared on their skin. Swarms of insects, drawn by the scent, would slowly devour their flesh. Day after day, the victim lay baking under the sun, consumed by insects and their own waste. Death could take days, even weeks, to arrive. Scaphism was reserved for the most heinous crimes, a fate so cruel it boggles the mind. It was the ultimate expression of cruelty, a chilling message to all. The Colosseum, that grand amphitheater of death, hosted the damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to beasts. The condemned, often prisoners or criminals, were herded into the arena with only crude weapons. The gates opened, releasing starved, enraged beasts, lions, tigers, bears. The scene was a chaotic dance of death. The condemned stood little chance. The crowd roared as the beasts tore into their victims. This was more than entertainment. It reinforced Rome's vision of dominion over nature. Damnatio ad bestias was a gruesome reminder of the fragility of life. It served as both punishment and propaganda for Roman power. In the shadowy corridors of ancient Rome, justice could be as creative as it was cruel. Among the most chilling punishments devised by Roman law was the poena culli, or the punishment of the sack. This sentence was reserved for a crime considered almost unthinkable: parricide, the murder of one's own parent. The Romans believed that such an act tore at the very fabric of society, and so the punishment had to be equally severe, both as retribution and as a warning to others. The condemned was not simply executed. Instead, they were sewn into a heavy leather sack, a prison within a prison, and they were not alone. Joining them inside this suffocating darkness were 4 live animals: a dog, a rooster, a viper, and an ape. Each animal was chosen for its symbolic meaning, and their presence turned the sack into a chaotic living tomb. The dog, loyal yet now forced into violence, represented betrayal. The rooster, a symbol of vigilance, marked the violation of trust. The viper, with its venomous bite, embodied treachery. And the ape, seen as a creature of wild depravity, stood for the unnaturalness of the crime. Together, these animals created a living allegory of the parricide's guilt. Once the sack was sealed, the condemned and the animals were carried to the edge of a river or the sea. There, in front of a silent crowd, the sack was hurled into the water. The weight of the leather and the frantic movement inside dragged it down, pulling its occupants into darkness and oblivion. The river became both executioner and grave, ensuring that the crime and the criminal would be washed away from the memory of the living. Imagine the terror, the utter claustrophobia of being trapped in total darkness, unable to move, surrounded by panicked, biting, clawing animals. The air would quickly grow thin, the sounds of struggle echoing in the confined space as fear and desperation took hold. The condemned would fight for every breath, their senses overwhelmed by the chaos and the stench. The animals, equally terrified, would lash out in confusion, turning the sack into a scene of utter panic. This was not just a punishment of the body, but of the mind and soul, a fate designed to erase the criminal from memory, as if they had never existed. For the Romans, this was more than execution. It was a ritualistic cleansing, a way to purge society of the taint of such a crime. The act was meant to restore order, to reassure the community that justice, however harsh, would always prevail. The Poena Culli stands as a testament to the symbolic power of Roman law, brutal, theatrical, and unforgettable. It was a warning sewn into the very darkness it created, a reminder that some crimes would be met with punishments as extraordinary as the acts themselves. Fire, both destructive and purifying, played a role in Roman justice. Burning at the stake was reserved for crimes like treason, heresy, and arson. The condemned, bound to a pyre, faced suffocation and flames as the crowd watched. This was more than punishment, it was a symbolic act of purification. By consigning the condemned to flames, Romans believed they cleansed society of evil. Roman justice relied on a brutal toolkit of flogging and mutilation. The flagrum, a whip with weighted thongs, tore into flesh, drawing blood and inflicting excruciating pain. Flogging was often just the beginning. Branding marked the condemned for life, a visible symbol of their crime. Amputation and blinding were also used. Thieves might lose a hand, enemies of the state their sight. These punishments left lasting reminders, both physical and psychological. Pain and disfigurement were potent tools of control. The Romans ensured that punishment was both a spectacle and a warning. As we've explored Rome's torture methods, remember these practices reflect a brutal chapter in human history. They offer a chilling glimpse into a world where cruelty was a tool of control and a reminder of life's fragility. If you found this exploration compelling, subscribe for more historical deep dives.